I am Bridget Long, Dean and Saris Professor of Education and Economics at the Harvard Graduate School of Education. I am delighted to have an audience with the Luohan Academy and its constituents who are dedicated to the pursuit of data-informed decision-making. The Harvard Graduate School of Education is committed to disseminating what works in education in a similar fashion, and I invite you to visit our Education Now and Usable Knowledge websites for topical discussion and highlights from our faculty's research. My own research is dedicated to the use of data in education. For over 2 decades, I've focused on the economics of education and examined factors that influence post-secondary student enrollment decisions, choice, and persistence. I've used administrative data to explore long-standing questions in higher education, such as the effectiveness of financial aid policy, how to help students who are academically underprepared, and the role of instructors in improving student outcomes. I recently testified before the United States Senate Committee on Education about ways to make it easier for students to get financial support for higher education. This testimony centered on research I've done to quantify the positive effects of better education programs, a persuasive argument made with data. I'm hopeful that this work will help to improve access to college. I'm heartened to see trends that indicate more in education are embracing the use of data. There has certainly been a shift in the mindset about the value of data that encourages teachers, administrators, and district leaders to proactively use data to inform their decisions. As a school at Harvard, HGSE recently recruited a data scientist and awarded him the Bloom Family Assistant Professor of Data Science Chair because we believe a person in this role could bring so much to the field. Data science in education is not new, but our emphasis on its importance has a renewed sense of urgency, especially given the current crises and challenges facing educators and learners. I am thrilled to introduce this discussion with HGSE faculty member, Dr. Kathryn Boudett. Dr. Boudett has been an incredible contributor and partner both within our HGSE community as well as with national and international education audiences. Dr. Boudett is a senior lecturer in education, the director of the DataWise project, and faculty director of the master's degree program in learning and teaching. She works tirelessly every day, teaching and mentoring students, as well as running one of the most popular professional development courses at HGSE, DataWise. She is also co-editor of 4 books about utilizing data and shifting the mindset and culture of data usage in the primary and secondary education space. Now, in its 24th year, the Harvard DataWise project seeks to support schools and systems in the pursuit of using collaborative data inquiry. Dr. Boudett will certainly be able to walk you through the course and talk about it in detail. With an equity lens, the DataWise improvement process and action, collaboration, evidence, or ACE, habits of mind, we hope to encourage the collection and application of data in classrooms around the world. We will now transition to the main event with Dr. Boudett and HGSE alumna Andrea Kane, who is a member of my Dean's Leadership Council at HGSE. Thank you for contributing to HGSE with your service, Andrea.
It is my honor to welcome everyone to our on-air panel on this very important discussion about education during our new normal. I'm going to first ask questions about how we use data to understand what's going on in schools. And Kathy, I'd love to start with you. Bridget has briefly introduced DataWise, but can you provide more information on the DataWise process? Data is transforming all aspects of life, and how does that happen in the education sector, and how does your work connect to that use of data?
Sure, thanks, Andrea. Well, the education sector, as you said, it's huge. I mean, it incorporates national and regional governments, which often determine assessment policies, sometimes curriculum policies. Then there's the corporations and nonprofit organizations that provide curriculum or professional learning or other services, sometimes actually design assessments themselves. And then kind of on the inside are the actual providers of the educational services. So those are public and private schools, and within districts, we've got schools, and within schools, we've got classrooms. And at the sort of very center of that is what David Cohen and Deborah Lobenberg-Ball call the instructional core. That's where students, teachers, and content meet. And I love the instructional core because that's where learning happens. And my work with the DataWise project is really focused on that instructional core. Because actually nothing that happens on a policy level from those outer circles is going to have any impact on what we care most about unless we make changes in the instructional core. So that's kind of why DataWise came into being. In 2001, the United States Congress passed legislation that mandated testing for all students, and also their public reporting of the results of those testing, both at aggregate and sort of highly disaggregated levels. And it wasn't clear when that policy was first put into place, what was going to be the impact on the instructional core. And my mentor, economist Richard Murnane, brought together a group of researchers at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and also educators from the Boston Public Schools just across the river, the Charles River from Cambridge. And we wanted to learn from those educators, what does it mean to take these assessment results that are suddenly becoming available and actually use them to make a difference in the instructional core. And so each of us believed that the essential goal of education is to provide each student with the tools they need to be successful, not just in school, but in life. And that we were all keenly aware of the inequities that were present already in the educational system, and kind of concerned that all this focus on numbers could actually further disadvantage the kids for whom the educational system already wasn't working. And so we work with these educators to figure out how could they take a high road instead of just sort of using that data in a kind of quick and expeditious way. And we found that they were using those high stakes tests as a way to start conversations, not to identify problems. And what they were doing was they were saying, all right, what are those high stakes tests sort of, what questions are they arising for us? And then they sort of systematically went through a process of collecting more and better and more precise information about their students so that they could actually do something about it. We captured their model in something we call the DataWise improvement process. It's an 8-step model. Sometimes we call it the swoosh because it's in an arrow that's kind of curves back in on itself. And it has 3 phases. And I think really important and maybe a bit of a surprise to those of us who are on the research side was this big, wide base. They did not go right into looking at data, but instead the educators that were using data wisely started with themselves. They started by building a culture of trust, really taking some time to organize for collaborative work so that they would be able, when it came to the step of getting deeper into data, they would be able to have hard conversations about what's working and not working in schools. So part of that prepare phase is learning how to collaborate. And then also in there is having a sense of building the assessment literacy so that when they start to look at assessments, they sort of have a common grounding in how to use that data responsibly. So that's sort of what we captured as the prepare phase. Then there's the inquire phase. And interesting here was that although they start when they look at creating a data overview, that might be with these high stakes mandated tests, but very quickly they use those to dig into student data so they can really get a sense of what's going on with learners. Where are they struggling? Where are their sort of successes that you can build on? And then as you go from looking at learners, you shift to looking at your own teaching. So examining instruction and getting a sense of what are we doing as educators to either support or hinder what's happening with our students, or what are we not doing? And that can be tough. That's actually getting into one another's classrooms or watching video and getting a feeling for the role that instruction plays. And again, in that instructional core that I mentioned, it's not just about a student and some content. The teacher's a critical piece of that. So that's why that's so important. And then the final phase, the ACT phase, is when people decide, okay, now that we've identified something that we're doing as educators that might be impacting what we're seeing in student learning, what are we going to do about it? And that's where they get to the place of creating an action plan, very importantly, developing a plan for how you would assess progress, which often means tapping into either existing assessments or needing to develop or identify others, and then acting, assessing, and adjusting. So that's kind of the process that that came out of this meeting of the minds between researchers and practitioners. And we wrote it up in a book called DataWise, and we were sort of excited to see that it was well received by educators in the field. But we went ahead and did DataWise on ourselves. We went through that that swoosh, and we decided to get a sense of how is our training and the materials that we're offering this, how is this working out in the world? And that's where we kind of got I don't want to call it a rude awakening, but we realized that even though we were hearing from some folks that the model really resonated, it wasn't working for everybody. And so we tried to get curious about that, take an inquiry stance. And what we discovered was that doing the 8 steps by themselves was just not enough. The people who were able to actually impact student learning had a certain set of mindsets that they were bringing to the work, and that colored everything. And so we decided we're going to need to be clear about what those mindsets are. And we come to call them the ACE habits of mind. And the A stands for a shared commitment to action, assessment, and adjustment, meaning you don't let yourself just get stuck in analysis paralysis, but you're willing to try something and know that you're going to have to adjust it, and that's okay. That doesn't mean you're failing. So that orientation toward action. The C stands for intentional collaboration, and that sort of goes against the bad habit of assuming if you just put a bunch of teachers in a room or a bunch of anybody in a room that they're going to know how to work together and they're going to do that effectively. So actually putting in place some protocols that allow for the collaboration to truly hear all voices. And then E is the relentless focus on evidence. And that means no matter what stage of the process you're at, you're really asking one another, what are we seeing that makes us draw the conclusions? And you're defining data really broadly. And so we learned that if you go through the 8 steps with those habits of mind, then you can see in the instructional core that some fundamental things can start changing.
That's wonderful. And I have to say, you are very humble. DataWise has changed the culture in education in the United States in so many incredible ways. I know as a graduate of Harvard and as someone who was on the Dean's Leadership Council when it was first introduced, I came back to my program and found that we were teaching principals all sorts of skills they needed, but they didn't know how to read data, how to understand data, all the data literacy. Moreover, they had so much fear and anxiety because the way data had been rolled out in schools was so punitive. So they didn't feel comfortable trying things. They didn't feel comfortable having conversations. So you really have created a process and recommendations for a culture that have been so effective in schools. I know there are DataWise coaches on 4 continents, and that you've led the DataWise Leadership Institute in Australia for educators from the Pacific Rim, including China. I'm just curious, Kathy, what has your experience been seeing DataWise sort of translated literally and figuratively across the globe?
Well, it's been really wonderful. I feel like there's a sense of, I feel a connection to educators on sort of every part of the planet now, because you get to know people in this work. And I mean, we have this learning path that starts with people just taking this MOOC. So it's this massive open online course that we developed. It was very popular during COVID times. we're over 100,000 registrations now, but the path begins with that, and then sort of can take people all the way through learning the process and eventually becoming certified coaches and then joining a coach network. But even on that light touch side of the MOOC, I find that when I read the comments from the educators in there, it just gives me a sense of how deeply teachers care about their students, that it's what called them to the profession, and teachers are learners. They want to invest in their own learning and take the time to play with new ideas. And so one thing that I've thought was been interesting about seeing how people interact with the ideas in the MOOC is how much they appreciate this protocol called the I Notice, I Wonder protocol. And we didn't even make it up, but we sort of put it out there in front of people. And it basically is, by protocol, I mean like a set of instructions that you would give people before they have a conversation. And DataWise is very much about people looking at data together. So this is not, back in the early days when those test scores were coming out, I would hear stories of principals staying up late at night and they're in their pajamas combing through the data so they can tell their staff the next morning what it means. And DataWise is not that. It's the staff themselves coming together and talking about what they see in the data and deciding for themselves what they think it means given their understanding of the context. And so this I Notice, I Wonder protocol, the idea is you want to make sure that all voices are heard. It clarifies when you're supposed to talk, when you're supposed to listen, and it helps the conversation stay focused. And so what happens when you're looking at a chart or a report, you just start by going around one at a time and you point out something that you notice, something that you see in the chart. And what invariably happens is that it brings people to the realization that the person sitting next to them saw something in the data that they hadn't even noticed. And that notice language makes sure that you're not drawing a lot of conclusions yet. You're just saying, oh, I'm seeing that this subgroup is performing lower than this one or something like that, but you're not saying anything about what you should do about it. Then after you go through a couple of rounds of noticing, then you get into wondering, and you have to frame it as a question. And this, it seems that educators tell us it is so liberating, because I think a lot of us, especially folks who might be a little intimidated by sort of math or numbers, think if you look at a chart, you've got to say something smart. You should sort of wow people at the table with this insightful statement that you have. But, and that can be intimidating. But if you're just invited to wonder and to admit that actually that chart's not going to have a lot of answers, it's just going to kind of potentially point you in the direction of some additional questions, then you can kind of free your creative mind and not fall into the trap of making assumptions about students that might sort of take us down a path where we don't want to go. So what it does then is it makes people realize that they're going to need to define data a lot more broadly than a chart. And those questions always point you to looking at sort of broader data and data that allows you to get a little closer to knowing the students as people. So that's been sort of powerful. So that was kind of when we're just introducing things sort of at the MOOC level. At the sort of deeper level, when we're actually working with schools and helping them to launch DataWise in their setting, plan how to do things, it seems like I get to see how, when we have teams of people with us, what are some of the dynamics around what's perhaps a bit of a American sort of democratic approach to having people take their turns and speak one at a time? How does that get received with an international audience? And it's interesting that sometimes it can be it can feel disrespectful almost to not give the leader the final word, or to not just let the leader hold forth and say what they think needs to be done. But our international audiences, they play along with us. And I think the leaders are sometimes finding, oh, okay, so I don't have to have all the answers here. I'm not in the classroom every day. There's space for me to listen to what the people who actually know these kids are thinking. And that can be liberating. And listening is actually a pretty important leadership skill. And we need to be sure that we create opportunities for that to be cultivated. And then at the sort of far side, where people become certified coaches, they join a network. One thing that I've learned is just the hunger to stay in community with people who want to continue to learn about how to do this work well. We're noticing that what sort of got me into the field of education, which is a sense that our society has profound inequities and that education must be part of the answer to how to deal with those inequities. I'm learning that there's inequities in every country. Sometimes it might be sort of driven by race or by gender, by socioeconomic status, by the sort of physical or cognitive abilities or disabilities of students, but everybody around the world can point to a place where they think that education could be the answer to helping to give every person a chance. And so that's been a really gratifying thing by seeing how this work is taken up.
Definitely. DataWise definitely has achieved success throughout the world, and so many people who care so much about education as a way to change lives and to make societies more inclusive and help, children's trajectories into adulthood. Look at data and look at how students are doing. So it's so important. And Long, I'm just wondering what your comments are on the DataWise process and on creating data-informed cultures and communities in schools.
Okay, so firstly, I was told that this is the 100th anniversary of the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So congratulations, and I think Harvard has done greatly, profoundly for the global education. So that's really great. And secondly, let me congratulate on the DataWise project. I think it's fascinating to hear what you talked about. A lot of time, when we are teachers, when we teach, I think sometimes we forget that we are providing a service to our customers. We're trying to help the kids, our students, to grow. So they are our customers, and so we're serving them. We're not just but this you see in the how should I say, in the digitized industries, in e-commerce, in many areas, in digital finance. This is actually so common. This is the future. I believe this is also the future of education. That is from the B2C to C2B, from business customers converting to the customer-driven business, and that is powered by data. And so, to me, that you might not doing exactly the big data type that's the high-tech companies are doing, but really the spirit. This is really the spirit. The digital technology is really driven all of us to try to serve our customers better, and we have to listen to them. And so we have to understand them. So this is really the key, and it's so natural and so crucial that I believe that represents the future direction of education. And that is actually in every service industry. So let me give you several examples. One is now we're all tortured. I understand in the United States, particularly so right now, we're tortured by COVID. And so back in February, when it was somehow rampant in China, so we know that it's coming down, but we know that, so we have to make a choice between the controlling the virus versus the economic recovery. Then for that, so if you recover too quickly, then the virus might come back. But if you are too slow, people will also suffer. So really you need the data. So we actually at Luohan Academy will we use the daily big data to essentially cover daily economic activity pretty much in most of the areas in China. So that means every day, not only we can capture the progress of virus, the speed of spreading. We can also measure the economic activities. So by balancing the two, that's how you make progress. And you can see that nowadays, a lot of the regimes, countries, they somehow suffer a bit because they don't know how to balance those two things. So that's one critical thing we're feeling right now. But let me give you some other other examples. Like on Alibaba's platform, so we have the more than 10 million SMEs. Half of the entrepreneurs are women. They are startups. So for those initial business, we have to help them. So Alibaba provide big data tools called the business advisor. So essentially, it helps the initial startups to quickly understand. So you see e-commerce on one hand suddenly breaks the traditional boundary of the market. So now a new startup with 2 or 3 people, now they can reach the customers like thousands of kilometers away. But then the market is so huge, you don't know where to start. They need to analyze, understand the data. So this business advisor to help them to quickly get to know the market. We can see that immediately after they get to learn to analyze the data, their sales just jump. So that's another example. New startups do not have a lot of collaterals. So that's why they cannot borrow from the traditional banks. Now, but because of the data, they can actually get the loans at very early stage. So using Professor Ben Holmstrom, MIT professor, a Nobel Prize winner, his words, information is a new collateral. Information, of course, is data. So I'm giving you several examples to show that the whole world is shifting toward a world that we can understand our customers better to serve their needs, or we can assess risk to provide financial services. This world is going there. I believe education is in the same direction. So I'm so happy to hear what DataWise is doing.
Oh, I so agree with you. I think understanding data and at times using technology to really kind of understand what's going on and make decisions can help society at so many levels, including in education and whether it's health, finance, new startups, helping people make those difficult, nuanced decisions, sometimes choices between economy and health. It's so important and so empowering. And I want to ask you, Kathy, when we look at the education sphere and DataWise, we talk about how understanding data can really help teachers. But I'm wondering also about parents and other educational stakeholders who can also be empowered by the DataWise process, and perhaps even students themselves.
Absolutely, students, for sure. I mean, I loved how Long talked about, flipping things so that the customer is key. And I mean, when we really think about it, it's those actual children. They're the ones living in the instructional core. They know what they know. Sometimes they don't know what they don't know, but they have so much to offer educators and really everyone in terms of helping us understand what works, what resonates for children, what supports their learning, what gets in the way of it. And I'm kind of picturing a conversation I had with a school leader many years ago when she was talking about how maybe we need to get away from the word of data and think more about evidence. And she said, the real question is, what is our evidence that students are learning? And I think about what her school looked like. And absolutely, there were charts. There were some, as you walked in the building, you could sort of get a sense of where the different classrooms were with respect to standards. But there was also student work everywhere. There were projects the kids had done that were stapled to the walls. There was even one classroom that had string going across, and evidence of student learning was hanging from those strings, so that when you walked in, it was a sort of almost like a hive of activity. And when you bring parents into a school setting like that, you have a parent-teacher conference, and ideally, if you have the student and the teacher and the parent all having a conversation about the evidence of student work, that's where I love the way you use the word empower, because that's where sort of everyone in that conversation is empowered. The student, it's not like education is being done to them. They have a sense of what are my goals, and it's important to talk with students about what are their long-term goals, but also what are my goals in this class this year? What do I want to get better at? And they can articulate that by sharing evidence with parents. It lets parents kind of see their students as agents of their own change, not people that need to be, brought to task if they don't do enough homework or something. But and the parents start to think, well, what's my supportive role to help my student get to where they are? And then the teacher becomes someone who's like facilitating this work, as opposed to trying to, push it down on kids who, for some reason, sometimes people think are not willing to put in the effort. But when the children own their data and can sort of look at it and track it, it can be really powerful. And then there's another kind of data that I want to talk about, which is data about teaching practice. So, the teachers, I said they're central, but they need to have an opportunity to learn and grow. And in the early days, that often, if you wanted to have somebody come in and look at your practice, especially if you wanted like a fellow teacher, another math teacher from across the hall, it would be this elaborate process of trying to make sure you were both, the person was free to come in and who was going to care for their students. But in recent years, videotaping your own classes has been something much easier to do. And it is so powerful to have a colleague look at you teach and you say, can you just check here as I'm teaching, how are the kids in the back of the room dealing with this? Are they as engaged as the people in the front? Or can you give me a read on the questions that I ask in class? Am I being as rigorous with my questions of girls as I are with my questions of boys? And so you've got your colleagues, they're capturing that kind of data, and then you're having an evidence-based conversation where you've sort of enlisted them to help you see what your own blind spots might be, and to help you use that evidence to figure out what you do next. And I feel like I know for my own role as a professor who really values having other colleagues and coaches help me think about my own practice, there's nothing more empowering than being able to have an evidence-based conversation with people who are invested in you getting better at your craft.
Excellent. Well, I definitely think evidence is something that's also very important in China. I know I do a lot of professional development sessions, and there is all that feedback that people take in. And Long, I'm wondering, as an expert in the digital economy, how do you think both using data and using technology and kind of putting all that evidence together could help education in China, and what might that look like?
So let me first digress slightly to talk a little bit about the market, the digitized market. So let me give you a concrete example. So on Alibaba's platform, now we have hundreds of millions of users. And so we have, as I said, more than 10 million companies, the sellers. So how do you build your reputation then? Is actually it's the users. They rate everything. They rate each product. They rate each seller. They rate each service. So they contribute data. And by that, so we build a trust system in such a way that it's as if we have hundreds of millions of people that are shopping in the same market at the same time, even though they've never seen the stores, but they trust them because we share the data, we spread trust. So that's how, just now I heard Cassie talk about parents, different participants. Now, that's how we can use the data to do a lot of stuff. Now, back to education. So I think, obviously, education is so crucial. Humans we are different from the other animals because we can accumulate knowledge and we can learn. So we're separated by learning. So it's so crucial that we can have the best educational opportunities. Now, I think that the data can help us technology can help us in many ways. Firstly, but let me using the several of my students' companies example to show how it works. So I, as probably Daniel introduced to you, I'm also the executive provost of the Hupan School of Entrepreneurship. So I have several entrepreneur students. One of them is the company is called VIP Kit. It's a unicorn. Now, but what it does then is that it actually using the internet, to link the Chinese kids, most of them are Chinese kids, but they're also from other countries, to a lot of the English speakers across the world. They teach English, but they have this teaching is not really in the classroom. They teach them English. They're walking on the street, they're playing. A lot of it's the real life teaching, talking, and so that's how the kids can learn. And they have more than 700,000 students who have learned. They have more than 90,000 teachers. Most of the teachers, I would imagine, they're not really necessarily full-time teachers, but they can teach this or that. They just talk about their life, the fun, and so this is one thing that help the kids in the remote areas. They can learn the best English, so in real life cases. This is one example. Give them opportunities. Now, another company is called TAL. So they have this, it's the Tomorrow Advancing Life. It's another educational company. And what it does is to have this dual teacher system. So they have kind of the first-rate master teacher who's teaching the advanced materials. Now they have another teacher who's in the classroom with the kids. Now this second teacher serves relatively more as assistant type. So help the students to do the homework, to review the material. In this combination then, the kids, even they live in the remote areas, on the mountains, they actually can learn from the best teachers. So that is another example. So we provide inclusion of the service. Maybe one day, teachers from Harvard, can teach them. Then the local teachers help the kids understand the material a little bit better. That's the dual teaching system. And I have a third example. It's called LAIX. It's a listed company now in the United States. Now, what it does is fascinating. It's actually just now. I think I forgot. I think it's Cassie talk. Yeah, Cassie talk about is the teachers learning from the feedback, the training, teachers training itself through the data. But actually, this particular one is helping the Chinese, and there are hundreds of millions of Chinese subscribe to this app. What it does to help them to using the AI technology to help them to learn English. Now, why do you try to using the app to learn English? Because it uses the AI to track you, to help you, let you to practice. Each time it kind of decomposes your pronunciation, so that tell you, and also your grammar, this or that tell you how to improve. So you have a AI trainer help the students to train, to practice. This is especially useful because especially when you learn in language, you have to practice a lot. And your normal teacher cannot be with you all the time. Now you have AI trainer that can help you to do that. So I'm giving you several examples to show that the traditional education, the teaching is being decomposed by the functions are being decomposed by the digital technology. And then the new business models are coming up with the aid of the internet, connectivity, and with the aid of the AI, analyze the big data, a lot of ways to help the kids to provide more inclusive educations to a lot of people. Many of my students, like they are the CEOs, entrepreneurs, secretly they learn the English using that AI trainer, so they progress quickly. So I think it can do a lot of things. But finally, let me give you a final example of the learning by doing in the digital world. So this is another thing I think is fascinating, because when we are facing the digital technology, a lot of time we say you have to learn the technology, you have to learn the language, otherwise you are kind of, you will be behind. But what we find nowadays in the e-commerce, we did some study. We look at the big data. We find it's so fascinating. In those rural areas, in the villages, we find that the peasants, the farmers, if they get access to the internet, to the e-commerce, their income is actually as high as those ones with the college education, but who do not do the e-commerce. The reason is that when you get access to the e-commerce, have the opportunities, you learn by doing. And then nowadays, the technology has made it so easy to get access to this. It's like the little kids, they play, 2-year-old, they can quickly get on to play games. So nowadays, the digital technology makes the threshold of that learning, that threshold to be so low that a lot of people can participate. So they can learn by this way very fast. So I think technology is wonderful if it is used properly. And it's important to education.
I love that. John Dewey, the famous educator and philosopher, talked about learning by doing. It's a model of progressive education. Technology did not really exist in John Dewey's time, but I think he would really appreciate your insights of letting people try and experiment and giving them access to sort of, be involved immediately. I think that's so wonderful. And we are trying to create more inclusivity. I also know VIP Kid very well. And the American teachers who teach in VIP Kids say they get as much from the exchange and the interaction as I think the students get across the globe. And I also love the idea how technology can bring us all together so we can understand our similarities, we can appreciate our different perspectives, and we can become closer as a world. So that's so excellent. Kathy, we've talked about how data, how technology can empower us. I'm just wondering, what are the pitfalls? And you mentioned this a bit, but if you could elaborate on when we use data incorrectly, because we could definitely, put people in boxes and not use the data right. So I'm just wondering what your insights are about that.
Sure. It's interesting you said correctly, and I love to think about using data wisely. And I feel
wisely, right?
Yeah, I know. I mean, the
Right.
distinction matters, right? Because correct is something that like an AI tool could get right. But if we want to start bringing in wisdom, we need to figure out how to to honor the humanity of the people who are using the data and the people whose data we are looking at. And I think that using data wisely means using it with good judgment. And so there is such a role for human beings in this world still, even with everything that technology can do for us. Because knowledge of the needs of the students, knowledge of the capabilities of the teacher, and figuring out how to match those up is really important. I'd say sort of the biggest pitfall, I think, is reducing students to numbers. and acting like a particular score on a test tells you everything you need to know about that student and kind of the maximum that that student can learn. And that's the gravest danger. The idea on the flip side would be using data to personalize. And I feel like that's what Long was talking about a lot in terms of data opening up the possibility that you can kind of, for an individual student, if you're personalizing instead of just kind of labeling, data is important. And I'm just always thinking about that each student has a story, that each student has multiple stories about who they are, and we don't want to make assumptions about students. On the teaching side, I'd say a pitfall is trying to game the system in some way. I mean, so much of what Long talked about was using data to kind of get formative information that allows you to make additional steps and additional growth. And that's a powerful way of using data. Using data to just try to figure out, ooh, how can we make our numbers look good? That's a disaster. I mean, because that's when you're trying to figure out, ooh, these few students who are kind of just barely passing, how can we get them over the hump so that as a school we get out of trouble or something? That doesn't serve anyone well. You want to have the sense that no matter where a student is in the sort of progression, that there's room to grow, and we don't want to ignore the kids who seem to be scoring really highly on things, and we certainly don't want to ignore the kids whose scores are so low that you feel like, oh, I'm not sure it's worth it to spend time there. So so that's another piece. And then I'd say another pitfall is giving people data, but not giving them time to look at it and talk about it. And so it doesn't do a teacher any good to have loads of data, but not the opportunity to actually figure out, well, what does this mean for my practice? And how can I learn with other people about how to serve everyone well? And then the final thing is, we talk about how what you measure becomes what matters. And it's, developing assessments can be a very expensive proposition, but if you narrow the things you measure too much, then you'll steer teachers and students away from a really holistic curriculum. And so I think that's a pitfall we all need to be thinking about. And some of the sort of subtle and quick return kinds of data that Long was talking about, that could be applied to a sort of a broader range than just the literacy and numeracy, which has been a place where a lot of attention has been spent on trying to develop measures.
No, I so agree with you. And I think it's so important to have that kind of comprehensive, that nuanced look, and to not have technology to define, but we need humans at the helm who can read and understand and question that technology. That's definitely an ethos, I think, with Otis, that it's about the educator, and the technology is just one of many tools that's used. And I'm wondering, Long, when we zoom out and look beyond today, given that the world is changing and workplaces are transforming and changing, what do you think are the most important things that we should be teaching, and this is writ large in schools and universities, in China and in the world? What are those skills that students need to be sort of successful as we evolve?
Well, I'm aware that I'm talking to educational experts, so I'm not sure I'm getting this right. I think
no right
there are a
answer.
couple of things. There are a couple of things we know. One is that sometimes we call the world is like, we'll call this VUCA. It's vague, it's uncertain, it's complicated. What is ambiguous? And I call this UK because it's another A is accelerating. So it's very uncertain world. That's one thing we know. The second thing we almost for certain to know is that technology is making machines smarter and smarter. I think they will, in some sense, in terms of numbers, the analytical, normal analytical abilities, they will be smarter than people. They're faster. They remember a lot of things. So they can remember a lot of knowledge. So I believe that for the future, how do we live in a world that machines can remember a lot of things, calculate much quicker, and the world is so uncertain. So I think we have, obviously we need to learn several things. We need to learn adaptability. We need to learn how to use the knowledge. We need to learn how to gain the wisdom. It's not the knowledge per se, but it's other things. I think the dimensions, maybe Cassie and Andre, you kind of mentioned a bit, I believe. We can work with the. I don't think machines can replace us. They we need to maintain our I don't know, our love, our imagination, creativity, passion for things. Those are the things, I think, adaptability, perseverance. So I think those are the things um, we can always have. Then we can let machines help us. Those are some of the things we can learn, and I think we can also, as we probably to do that, we also probably want to make the we have to learn in the practice. I think it will be a little bit different from traditional way of learning, and we have to learn a lot of the goal-driven, question-driven, curiosity-driven, cross-discipline in practice learning. Those are the things. I'm not sure I know the answer, but I do know some of the things. I know that machines will be, in some sense, smarter, but they might not be intelligent. So really intelligent. They might not have the wisdom, and they might not have the creativity and the imagination of a drive to do a lot of the things beyond. So I think we need to learn those things. We have to adapt fast. Maybe we're okay.
Yes, very, very true. Good insights. Lots of good wisdom from you, Long, and from you, Kathy. I appreciate you so much. There's no question around the globe, COVID has impacted learning and impacted the classroom and parents and everyone's sort of experience of what school has looked like. People are concerned that students aren't necessarily as engaged. Students are having a lot of screen time. But at the same time, in various locations, we know there are effective practices for online learning, online engagement, and online assessment. We also know there are effective ways in which parents and teachers could help students achieve balance, whether it's going outside for some exercise, whether it's emotionally and socially replenishing in other ways. I'm just wondering, Kathy, how you've experienced the data-wise schools you know, the data-wise partners you have, the data-wise certified coaches, what their experience of COVID has been, and how has that impacted the data-wise process, the swoosh, the arrow?
Yeah, I feel like I love, Long, that you brought in words like love and creativity and passion, because what we found is that there's this tremendous challenge that COVID has presented in terms of a lot of the tests that would have been administered in the spring are no longer available. So people didn't take those assessments. So teachers were beginning the school year without sort of that go-to data that they thought they were going to have. And we realized from talking with educators that actually the single most valuable data source that educators could collect in these times on students were stories of how students were coping with the sort of new world they had been thrust into, stories about what's working in terms of what kinds of online learning experiences are mattering for kids. And from that, with that in hand, with a sense of the humanity of the students that they're trying to reach in this virtual way, then they could sort of tailor and again personalize the education to meet the real needs of students right now. So I feel like that's the sort of some shifts in how we think about what data is have been important. I also want to mention that it's just been interesting to see how exhausting it is to be a teacher in these times, and you know, trying to bring your full self to the online experience, project to your students that you know them, you love them, you care about them. We're going to continue to learn and reach high standards. But it can mean that collaborative time for teachers to meet, their teachers could be on empty by the end of a day of that sort of thing. And it may be there may be fewer actual monetary resources to engage teachers in professional learning, and so I think that that's sort of an important consideration, because so much of what I've talked about is the need for teachers to get together, to collaborate, to do this work. But at the end of a long day of online teaching, it can be really hard to sort of find the time or muster the energy to have these conversations. But because it's driven by our need to serve students, we are finding teachers and school leaders digging deep to have those conversations. They feel like it's worth it if DataWise is not used as like, you know, one more thing, oh gosh, we have to have a DataWise meeting, but more like DataWise being just the thing that helps them to get to reach their kids in the way they want to in these hard times. And it just another opportunity I want to mention is that I talked about the need to look at one another's practice, for teachers to be able to, in a non-evaluative way, to see what other people's teaching look like and get feedback from peers on what they're seeing. COVID has unexpectedly made classroom observation more feasible for a lot of people. People are more like being video. It used to be this high stakes thing, and now if you're teaching online anyway, often it's not very hard to record the class for internal purposes and sort of share that with other people, and it's easier for people to especially people at the school level, to kind of get a dip into what's happening in lots of different classrooms. And I think that sense of the shared understanding of what education looks like, what are the shared challenges that people have, that's data. And I think that's going to actually potentially be a pivot where when we return to normal times, maybe it'll be a little bit more normalized to be able to get a sense of what's happening in classrooms in that way.
Excellent. Long, Kathy mentioned, this example of how, whether it's recording a Zoom classroom session, in some ways, technology can help not just during COVID, but maybe when it comes to, teacher observation or teacher learning, there are ways in which COVID will be a turning point for the use of technology in education. And, I see that at Otis all the time. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts are and whether you think technology will be accelerated during this time and used beyond it.
Right. So firstly, COVID has brought a lot of difficulty in education. And I saw some numbers. So there were 1.6 billion learners who were stopped from learning during the COVID period. But then globally, I think that there's a lot of the inequality in terms of being able to get remote access to learning. Some of them are more fortunate than some others. In China, we experienced this also. So we saw the Zoom just boomed during the period, and which is obviously a very good case to show that this is accelerating. And now let me give you one, another version of Zoom in China is called Ding Talk. So we use this all the time in China. And for Ding Talk, as it actually, so during the COVID period, there were 140,000 schools used the Ding Talk, and there's more than 3 million classes. More than 130 million students learned through the Ding Talk, and more than 6 million teachers taught on Ding Talk for more than 60 million hours. So those are some of the numbers during several months' time in China. So we definitely see this being accelerated. But I think I'm asking myself, so I think probably some of the changes obvious. For example, even this particular the show we're talking to each other, it was unlikely last year, much less likely, but now we're more kind of used to it. And in a sense, I've been talking to my North America and European colleagues nowadays all the time now during my evening time. But so it used to be so hard to talk to each other. You only see each other in like those annual meetings. But now actually you can have this monthly gathering, virtual gathering, happening a lot. So I think some of the changes obvious. I would, if I ask myself, I would bet that after the COVID period, students would still love to go back to the school. They still like to hang out somehow to each other a bit. But some of the things are happening. I think the people are getting used to have the remote access, remote learning as at least a good assistance. Some of the ones that can be replaced from you don't need to go to the on-site learning anymore. But I don't think it can completely replace it. So I see this accelerating, but I also see this evolving. I think there will be some kind of combination of online, offline, and also the tools online will also change. Let me finally give you an example of my personal experience of digital technology changing my learning. So I think starting from about maybe a dozen years ago, I stopped buying books, paper books. I only buy digital books because I noticed that now I can make notes and I can highlight, I can do a lot of things with the book. So that book becomes a personal experience and it will never disappear. Each time I lose my Kindle, I buy another one, I can download it, it all come back. So I have more than 10 years of experience and memory, my high and low, it's all kind of recorded in that book. And so after several years, I became so fascinated. I don't buy paper books anymore because it has limited ability to learn. So somehow I think the digital technology, if it has to accelerate so much, replace, it depends on the person. If you never had education opportunity, then that's great. Otherwise, I think it has to give you more abilities, tools to help you to really enhance your experience, and that will further accelerate. But I think this is coming.
Great example. I think it's also so interesting that you talked about one of the things about this time. Some ways technology allows you to connect with your colleagues in North America like us maybe more easily, and whether with the Kindle book you can highlight, and when you're researching you could easily search terms and passages and quotations. I'm wondering, Kathy, during this time, if we focus on the collaborative part of collaborative data inquiry, I'm wondering if those data-wise communities are benefiting from that sense of community, even during COVID and online education. We talk about how teachers can be burnt out and are working really hard. And I'm just wondering, you know, those first few steps in the data-wise process, it's really important to create trust, to create a community of educators working together. And I'm just wondering if that's giving educators solace and connection during this time.
I think it really is. I feel like I love how Long talked about all of the uncertainty in the world. I think I may be speaking for myself. It's getting to the place where, you know, what's going to actually happen in the world feels very uncertain, but like what matters to me feels more certain than ever. And I think that it's the sense that as human beings, we are connected to one another, whether it's to the student that I serve or to you guys in your various locations around the world. We might not understand it, but we're all part of sort of one being, I think. And what I think happens is in tough times, that those bonds become more obvious, that we need those to survive. And so my sense is that I think maybe we're all getting a little clearer on purpose. I just loved how many times, Long, you use the word, or whether you're someone who hasn't had access to high quality education before, that because we're so connected, we kind of owe it to ourselves as a community to reach every single kid. And I think that that human beings can do a lot if they're grounded in a sense of purpose and a sense of passion. And my experience in connecting with the DataWise coaching community and the broader community is that these times have only sort of sharpened our commitment to our personal and our collective why.
Oh, that's excellent. And Long, you have the last question. When we think about purpose and passion, creating a more inclusive world, how do you think our idea of what a school is will change?
Well, I think the community is the key, and I deeply feel it this way, and I really see it happening. But let me give you a concrete example. At Luohan Academy, so we have a lot of the PhD students. So I have a couple of Harvard PhD students. After they finish their comprehensive, they just come over. One lady, Patricia, she's been here for 2 years. And so she remotely talked to her supervisor, but she stay at Luohan because she can look at the data. She's very close to the frontier practice. She know what's going on. She can find the real questions. So I have students here from a lot of good schools, from Harvard, from Stanford, Princeton, a lot of the other schools, many schools across the world. So they came here, a bunch of young men and the women, and so they get along, so they learn from practice. So I think this is the community I'm talking about. So that's one side. And as sometimes I look out of my office, I look at them, and so I think they're so happy. They learn, and so they're just anyway. I feel this is like the future of the school. They don't necessarily stay in the ivory tower. Ivory tower will still be there because it still provides a lot of great training. But then they need to get into the real world. So the future is a community that links the theory to practice. It is cross-discipline. We see what's really going on. So in our towers, we learn things too slowly. We don't know the real questions. We read from only books, but in real life, we meet a lot of the real demands, needs. And so then you can apply your structured knowledge, your methodology much better. You can learn faster. So I think that's one thing I'm seeing happening. Another thing I'm happening is at Luohan Academy, I'm working with my colleagues across the world, social scientists. We talk about the important issues. We define important issues. So the mission of Luohan Academy is trying to work with the best minds to try to think about how to embrace the digital technology for the public good, for inclusive, sustainable goals. So, and we can work with them and think many of them they're from different universities, different places, and we work as if we belong. We work as if the office is next door. So I think that's the future of school. Teachers, the scholars who share similar goals, the work from each other breaks the traditional boundaries of the institutions and the time and the location. And students, they break the boundary between the theory and practice, training and the doing by learning. And so that's how that's the future of school. Universities has been and the schools have been set centuries ago, but now I think they are being decomposed, regenerated, reconstructed to lead us to a new learning experience. It could also be more inclusive, more accessible to a lot of people through the break the traditional boundary of time and the scope. I think that's the future of school.
Oh, that's excellent. I have goosebumps, and I am going to get you a Kindle version of John Dewey's books, because you talk about
Thank you very much.
love of learning, learning by doing, learning in engagement in the world, and learning and engagement with other people. And the two of you are so wise, and I feel like this was a data wise type kind of conversation of coming together. And that's what Luohan Academy does so well. It brings minds and perspectives from all over the world. So again, there are no right answers, but we get to explore. And it's just such a wonderful microcosm of what we should be doing as a whole world. So thank you both so much for an engaging, rich, important conversation. I so appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Andrea.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you, Kathy.